Well, hello there. This is Steve Stuffletto from Erie Community College. I found an old National Geographic magazine from 1953, and I thought we could take a look at this. You might recall in an earlier previous video we did a review of Popper Mechanics magazine from 1948. Okay, so how is this book bound? So the first thing you want to do is take a look at the backbone or the spine here, and I can see individual signatures here, and they are not cut or ground down, so that tells me this is not perfect bound hot melt adhesive or glue. So if I open up the outer cover, I see a side stitch staple here and a side stitch staple there, which means if I go to the back cover, I again see the side stitch staple and the side stitch staple. Now the cover, this is a plus cover. The cover is thicker than the inside text pages, so this plus cover booklet is side stitched. It's not saddle stitched, and it's not hot melt perfect bound. So National Geographic is famous for their yellow border frame. That's their brand, their trademark. If you think about Time Magazine does a similar thing, but theirs is red instead of yellow. Now the size of this book magazine is a little larger than a tabloid, a little larger than a digest. So a digest is typically 6 by 9. This is almost 7 by 10. So it's 7 by 10. Okay, so now that we know how it was bound, another question would be, let me just flip through some of these pages here. So one of the things we notice, this is pretty funny, look at the size of those IBM mainframe computers. Very funny. Okay. One of the things we notice right away is it has a lot more color in it than the Popper Mechanics did from 1948. And the color here is not fake color. Well, some of it is. That looks like that may be, I'm thinking out loud here, this may not be color separations. This still may be mechanical or synthesized color using hand-painted photographic masks. Okay. So one of the things we can find out is what is the LPI, screen rolling frequency, and you know how to do that. Okay, here's an interesting advertising age for Kodak. As you know, Kodak invented the first digital camera, but unfortunately they went bankrupt several years ago. There's an illustration. Okay, so why don't we find out what the LPI is. I keep finding this catches my eye. That's a duotone, right? Two-color duotone. Yeah, the color here doesn't look like it's photographic yet. The other interesting thing about this booklet is the page numbers don't make sense to me. And there are no page numbers. So that's very interesting about the page numbers. So if you think about this, this says page 572, but there's no way that that's 572 pages, right? Okay, so let's find a black and white halftone, and let's put the screen finder on it, and that'll tell us what our LPI is. So hopefully you can see this. Maybe I can get a little closer. Our more raised circle is right here, and when we follow that down, it says that the LPI is 150. Now that was very good, very fine for that time using letterpress. Okay. The other thing that we know about letterpress is if we use a magnifying glass, let's turn on our digital microscope. This is from Vitini. I'm going to turn on all the lights at full power. So this turns on all the lights at full power. Now if I come down and take a look at the text, yep, that's good. That's exactly what I want to see. You can recall that we can zoom in at 10x. That's a nice sharp picture. Or we can zoom in at 40x. And when I zoom in at 40x, let me turn this off for a second here. When I zoom in at 40x, you can see the trademark characteristic of anything that's printed with a relief plate, and that is that the outer edges have this halo ring outline border. So that tells me it's letterpress. The other thing we know about letterpress is that the the mid-tone dots are typically hollow at the center. So, yep, sure enough, at 40x, I'll get a little closer here maybe. So hopefully you can see this. At 40x, focus is a little sensitive here. So you can see at the very center of these dots, they're lighter than the outer edges. So it's behaving just like the type is. Yep. Okay, get a little closer maybe. All right. So this was an interesting magazine to take a look at. We know that it was printed in 1953. The printing process used was letterpress, probably sheet-fed letterpress, not rotary or web. We know that it was side-stitched, and we know that the LPI was pretty high at 150, and we know that they're using some process color, full color photographs now. So in contrast to that, let's take a look at a more current copy of National Geographic from 2012. The interesting thing here is now when I look at the backbone or the spine, I can't separate the signatures here. I don't see any folded, well, I see the folded signatures, but they're glued. So that means that this book, I don't see any staples or stitches here. Back cover, I don't see any stitches or staples here. So that tells me that this binding method has changed. Now we're using perfect binding, or sometimes called hot melt adhesive or hot melt glue binding. Okay. Let's just page through this quickly here. A lot of color. Beautiful looking color. Very nice. Look at all the crossover pages. All right, they got a lot of crossover pages here. I think I counted them up and I found 45 times that they used crossover pages. Now, the problem with crossover pages with a perfect bound book, you see this immediately on the front cover, is now it's a crossover, and because you got that gutter there, it just doesn't look right. It looks like one of the images is shifted too much, right? So maybe we can find another occurrence where it just doesn't look right. Now you would never really know on something like this, but when there's fine detail, crossing over. Okay, this is another good example. You would be expecting to see more of the arm here. So, see what I'm doing here? That looks more natural now, right? But who's going to use that brute force to open up the book? So the problem with perfect bound hot melt adhesive is you lose a lot of the imagery inside the gutter. So the image just doesn't look natural, right? You would never know on something like that. Never would know on something like that. Wouldn't know on that, nor that, nor that, nor that. Probably get away with that. That's fine. Fine. The point I'm making, again, not to be too redundant or repetitious here, is that yeah, a lot of these images you would never notice it, but some you do. Okay, same thing there, you would never notice that or that. Okay, how was this printed? Well, let's take a look. So let's go to a text page. Here's some text. Let's take our digital microscope and look at some text. Again, I want to turn on all the lights